are you expecting?
Welcome to the Reinvent Health podcast, where we explore how simple, sustainable changes can lead to extraordinary health transformations. I'm your host, Nikki Robertson, and today we're diving into a topic that's incredibly important for women, particularly those aged 30 to 65, preventing osteoporosis. Bone health isn't just something to think about in later years. It's something we need to nurture throughout our lives. And the latest research shows that by understanding the root cause of bone loss and making some proactive changes now, you can build stronger, more resilient bones for years to come. I also happen to be chatting to one of my all-time favorite guests, who is no stranger to the show and is a gold mine of information. Dr. Kirstin Lauritzen is a leading expert in functional medicine who's passionate about empowering women to take charge of their health. She'll share practical strategies that go beyond the basics of calcium and vitamin D, because it's not just about what you eat, but how your body absorbs and uses it. Whether you're navigating the hormonal shifts of your 30s, balancing stress in your 40s, or entering menopause, this conversation is packed with actionable insights tailored for every stage of life. So find a comfortable spot and let's dive into how you can support your bones and your overall health from the inside out. This episode is brought to you by Salal. In today's show, we go into detail about bone density and preventing osteoporosis. We discuss how early we should start thinking about bone health and why prevention is key, as well as what happens to our bones as we age, particularly during and after menopause, the role of genetics, lifestyle, and environmental factors, and what you can do to arrest the progression of bone loss. We also discuss the none too surprising positive effects of exercise on maintaining healthy bones as we age. So, Dr. Kirstin, thank you again for joining me, I think for the third time on the podcast. And today we are going to talk about a subject that doesn't get enough airtime. I think we can both agree that the subject of osteoporosis is really avoided until it's too late for most people. And I think it's a disease that affects women more than men, but men are not exempt from bone loss. So let's dive right in and see what we can unpack, because there's so much information that's not being brought to the forefront. So I'm really excited to chat to you today about how to bring people, I suppose hope is not really the right word, but actionable ways of taking charge of their health.
Yeah, we can do that. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Great. So bone density is, first and foremost, is one of the biggest predictors of metabolic health and longevity. So it's the habits we form and the action we take or don't take earlier on in our lives that informs how well we're going to age. And we all understand this, but we don't really think of it in terms of bone health. How does that all work?
Oh, goodness. Okay. So I think probably the best place to start with that is that bone health is what I see as a consequence, both positive or negative, of the other lifestyle things that we do. So with it being a factor as far as aging and metabolic health, bone health is going to respond to all of those things. So whether we're aging well or we're doing things that maybe are kind of causing us to not age well, that's going to have an impact on our bone health. I think that's like the simplest way to probably put that. And we're going to go into like tons of details here because I've got all of the things. But I think the last thing I would probably say on that is that and since we're pretty much going to probably talk a decent amount about women's health specifically because of menopause and postmenopause and the effects that those things will have, right, on our bone health. And also that has an impact on our metabolic health. It has an impact on our aging. We can talk a little bit about like the mitochondria and how all of that goes when we're talking about metabolic health, right? But the end point of it all really is that we've got to make sure that we'll talk about this, but we got to make sure that we've got our nutrition on board. We've got to make sure that we're actually being able to absorb those nutrients. I'm going to set us all up for this episode, but we've got to make sure we're absorbing the nutrients that we're taking in right through the gut. We've got to look at inflammation. And then of course, we don't ever want to miss the importance of exercise and sleep, as well as managing our stress. And then on top of that, the last bit is also balancing our hormones. Our hormones are going to play a really big role in how we're we're setting ourselves up for success in the future. And I also do want to say for anyone who's like, oh my gosh, it's too late for me. It's actually never too late to do quite a bit for your body, no matter how old you are. And I'll just start this off here just with an example, because one of the things I always do is if I start feeling like there's no way that anybody else has done this, there's no hope for me, I start going and looking at the wonderful resource that we have, which is the internet. And I start looking for people who have done the things that I think I might be able to do. Or there's lots of women out there who in their 70s, in their 80s changed their life.
They do.
And they decided to go to the gym and start building muscle and start doing these things, and you can see the literal change that they made with their health and their aging process, because there's an example just right there. So we'll talk about all those things, but that's where I would start this off.
Okay, great. And yes, we always say you're never too ill or too old to change your health. And people don't realize how much power they have, and just those small steps, what those small little tiny habits do to change the trajectory of your health at any age. So yeah, I like debunking that. I can't bear when people say to me, I'm too old. And that is like, no, that's just giving up. It's just not true. But when we speak about age, I mean, we all know that we give kids calcium and dairy products and all sorts of things when they're growing, because we understand how these nutrients feed our bones, vitamin D, magnesium, how all of these minerals help feed kids' bones and skeletal structure as they're growing. But why do we suddenly forget about that as we get to fully grown adults? We think, well, obviously it stopped growing, but it hasn't. Bones don't stop restructuring. And we stop giving them the resources to restructure healthily as we age. So let's start at the beginning. What would you say happens to our bones as we age? And let's take it back all the way to the 20s, because people think of osteoporosis in terms of it's something that happens to old people. And a degeneration starts really early on if you don't look after yourself. So where does this all come from?
Yeah. Let's say I'm going to call this also like in a healthy population too, because we're going to have other things that can also happen that can start this process off even earlier. Like if we have any kind of the words are escaping me. What are they called? Eating disorders or any sort of things like that. So, and if you're also, I will say this too, if you are lighter, if you're a smaller, lighter person, you actually have an increased risk of osteoporosis. Right. We'll also talk about that. But so what ends up happening in our 20s is we're actually still building bone usually through our 20s, maybe into our younger 30s. We're building bone. We're still working to it usually peaks around that time, our bone density. So, and actually I would say that's why it's really important to, in your teens and your 20s, to be doing a lot of like things that will help to influence that bone density. Things like not just getting exercise, but making sure that you're actually doing weight and muscle building exercises that help to build muscle mass. Though all of those kinds of things are going to be very helpful for building up bone density. We'll also talk about that, but also then too, making sure that you're eating the right foods. You're eating foods that are going to be really helpful for building that bone mass. So you talked about calcium. So eating foods that are going to be high in calcium, and also making sure that you're eating enough protein, because that also influences our calcium in our blood, which is really fascinating, which then has an influence on whether or not we're going to use some of that for building bone. On top of that, you mentioned magnesium. As adults, magnesium, I think the stats change all of the time, but I think we could probably say that half of the people on the planet are probably deficient in magnesium. So probably a good thing to look for foods that are higher in that, as well as potentially considering supplementation. In addition, omega-3s, your fatty acids, those are also really, really important, not just for maintaining, to help with inflammation and bridging that a little bit, but it also, because of that, can then have an impact on your bone health. Let's see. We also Vitamin D showing up in the sun, getting to the sun, all of that is going to have an impact on our bone density as well. And then in your 20s and 30s, that's going to be where you want to make sure that you're doing those things. You're having adequate nutrition that's going to help to set all of that up well. If we are eating foods that increase inflammation, we're going to be doing a little bit of the opposite of that. So those are some of the things that we really want to make sure that we're focusing on. And then as we head into our 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond, that's when we will start to see that breakdown. So we call it bone resorption. So breakdown will start to gradually happen over time, and will start to depending on whether or not you're doing the things to help keep the bone, it will start to outpace. It will start to break down faster than you form bone. So those are some things, and depending on how much, this is what's really critical too about focusing on your 20s and 30s, if you are there right now, and even your 40s, if you build bone mass now, for women on the postmenopausal side, you will delay we'll talk about this too in a little more detail, but once estrogen drops, which it does, and it does very quickly after menopause, women can lose a significant amount of their bone density. I've heard up to 20% in the 5 to 10 years post-menopause. But it can be more. I just want you to picture like a curve on a chart, and you can either have it be a slow decrease, or it can be like a very significant drop down in that 5 to 10 years after menopause, which the large majority of that can be slowed down if we've built a lot of muscle mass, if we've built up that bone density in our 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and that we're also eating, and we're changing the way that we're eating in postmenopause. We're eating more protein. We're making sure that we're eating enough of those foods that have the nutrients that we need to support all of that. But I cannot stress enough how important it is for that muscle mass, like using and doing things in your exercise routine that are going to build up that muscle mass. We can talk specifically why that is, but those are the kinds of things that are going to make the biggest impact. And that's what I want to share today is like, what are some of the few things that you can do that are going to have the most impact for you if this is something you want to work on? Those are the things that will do that. Does that answer that question pretty?
Absolutely.
Well, okay.
And also, you mentioned what we should be eating, but if I think about what I ate in my 20s, they were bone deteriorating foods. I mean, because in your 20s, you don't think about these things. You drink diet, soft drinks with phosphoric acid in it, which just disintegrate bone. If you had to put bone into a Diet Coke in a few days later, it won't be there anymore. But we drink this stuff when we're young because we want to lose weight, and we go on low-fat diets, and you need fat-soluble vitamins to absorb everything to make bone. So we actually almost shoot ourselves in the foot as a young person, not realizing that this is what's actually going to happen 50 years down the line. But as a young person, you don't think of that. It's too far away to be real, but this is where the problem actually begins. If you're lucky enough to, be exposed to real food and a complete whole food diet, and you're getting enough protein when you're young. And anyone listening who has teenagers should be really paying attention to this, is stay off the sugars and the soft drinks and the sugary snacks and everything with chemicals in it, because that is what eats away at our bones and at the particular time where our hormones are peaking. And this is where the structure is being laid down, as you mentioned. And what you also said was building muscle at that particular time of your life. I firmly believe that building muscle just pre-puberty will set you up for life, because once you've got that muscle mass established and that estrogen starts kicking in, you're already insulin sensitive, and you'll almost delay any kind of inflammation or insulin insensitivity if you have built enough muscle. So if your kids are active and they're doing weight-bearing exercise, it's a life insurance policy as far as I'm concerned. So let's dig, before we go into the hormones and the exercise, let's dig into what actually destroys our bone mass through the ages.
Oh, oh goodness. Okay.
Hmm.
So as you mentioned, there's going to be things like the foods that you're eating. So you mentioned soda being one of the things that has phosphoric acid in it, which can not only interrupt calcium and calcium absorption, but also because of the way that it works, it will start to break down bone, and it's mostly because of that calcium piece. The second thing also too though is that like sugar, inflammation, those kinds of things are going to increase our risk for bone density issues later on because gosh, for so many reasons. But inflammation, is going to be one of those things that we really want to be looking at. Factors that tend to like really, I could use the word aggravate bone
Yeah.
loss. Could be things like because of the inflammation, autoimmune disorders, autoimmune disease. Those are the kinds of things that can, because they are an inflammatory and immune condition. Part of it is I think that those kinds of conditions they'll kind of like they'll steal nutrients from your body because your body's trying to keep itself alive. And because of that, it can start to leach and take away from resources that should be going to other places, right? Your bones. Other things like thyroid imbalances, because your thyroid really controls so much of your cells and your hormones, and it's kind of like an operating center in a sense. Like every single cell in your body uses thyroid hormone, which is fascinating. And for women specifically, right? Like the thyroid conditions are really, really common. And there's a lot of different reasons for that, but a lot of this, you can track it down to like inflammation and stress and cortisol, being some of it. And then as well as just nutrient deficiencies, right? Like a lot of these things need the right nutrition in order for them to do their job well. You've got to give them those building blocks for them to succeed. Chronic inflammation, as I mentioned again, is going to be one of those things that will lead to bone deterioration over time. So and chronic inflammation can be caused by all sorts of different things. It can be caused by the foods that you're eating, as you mentioned. It can be caused by, if we do have food sensitivities and that's increasing inflammation, then that can lead to also issues with our health in many different areas. I will also say too, factors that do tend to increase bone loss as well can be things like gut imbalances too, and from the main point that it's just going to influence inflammation in the body because the immune system. I feel like I know you definitely have an episode on your podcast about gut health. I'm not sure if we have done that one on that one specifically. We have. Okay, so that would be a good one to revisit. But also from the factor that just because your gut is going to be the main resource or place where you're going to get the nutrients from your food. Nutrient absorption, plain and simple, is coming from your gut. So it's going to be really important that your gut health is on point. So all of those things can then increase bone loss and bone breakdown, whether we have those things present or we're trying to mitigate some of those things and stay on the like vitality, healthier side. In addition, smoking. Yeah. I would also say, it's a huge one. Smoking is just really, really tough for the body. It's really toxic. It essentially, if you want to talk about like metabolic health and mitochondria, like you're just introducing more toxins into your system, which then require, again, more nutrients from your system in order to be able to detox that out or to remove those things. And just really, really tough on your system. Also, excessive alcohol use that's another one that can be a habit or a coping mechanism, even we could call it, that it really has some significant impacts on the bone. Also, again, because of toxins and because of the nutrients that it and inflammation and things that it influences in the body. And then again, we've talked about this, but weight-bearing exercise as well, just not having enough of that and being very sedentary. Sedentary lifestyles, not getting enough movement, sitting in your desk, working on a computer all day, and then transitioning basically to the couch for the rest of the day, right? These are the kinds of things that you may not be thinking you're super sedentary, but if you're sitting a lot all day long, like these are things that are going to have an impact on bone breakdown over time.
Yeah. So I'm seeing in my practice over the last couple of years, and I'm pretty sure you are too, is people coming in younger and younger with diagnoses of loss in bone density, an increase in
Hmm.
diagnoses of arthritis, but young people, which all points to inflammation, which, when we think of bone loss, we think, oh, it's just a sign of aging, but this really, listening to you, it really does point to inflammation. And inflammation is what we're putting in our bodies and exposing ourselves to. So, what that is saying is we have control over what comes in and what we're exposed to. We really have more control than we realize. But we've got to realize what those contributing factors are. And yeah, you've outlined alcohol, smoking, even I'd say, use of pain medication.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Let's go
Thank
down
you.
that road briefly because people abuse pain medication and it's prescribed, and this is problematic.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so goodness gracious, pain medication is an interesting one too. Having a history being a chiropractor, this was on my intake forms, right? All the time. Do you
Right?
use pain medication? And then I also worked with a population, so athletes that,
Mm.
also experienced a significant amount of pain most times, right? And so it was common to see people say like, "Oh yeah, well I just take a pain med and over the counter." I won't mention any brand names, but over the counter things, and they thought that was okay and that was fine for them to be doing, but what I would have a conversation with them in the office and I would say, okay, hey, look, so why are we taking, and this is really good for all things. Why are we taking what we're taking?
Mm.
Why are we doing what we're doing? Let's start thinking about if you have pain and you're coming in to see me as a chiropractor and you've been taking this pain medication probably for potentially weeks, for potentially months, potentially for years, there's actually quite a lot that these pain medications, the impact that they can have on the body. One, they can impact your GI tract, like
Yeah.
significantly. That's like
Very
one of
much.
the main things that is a problem with over-the-counter pain medications over time.
Uh-huh. And PPIs.
Yes, and proton pump inhibitors. Oh, don't get me started. Oh man.
Going to
So
talk
because
about
what
that.
happened for yeah, it's a whole other podcast, but I'll briefly say that the reason why these are a problem is because they impact your stomach acid. And when your stomach acid is impacted, it impacts the rest of your digestion. So small intestine, large intestine, everything that they do, not and also including vitamin B12, they impact your ability to absorb that, which primarily happens in the stomach because of stomach acid. So these things are really, really important because when all of that then happens and the downstream effect of that, we've already said it, but it's going to impact the ability for you to absorb nutrients from your food. It's going to impact inflammation because those kinds of medications can increase things like intestinal permeability. They can then increase issues with your immune system. Now you have circulating inflammation throughout your body. And then if you're also potentially, I'm not going to sit on this one for too long, but if you also then are eating gluten and we already have a problem, it's
Right.
like we're just taking sandpaper and then we're just going against a wound that's already there and you're just kind of making that problem worse. So these medications do more than just eliminate pain for a short-term period of time. The second thing too is that then with all of that, I want you to think about when you are thinking about the GI tract and you're thinking about inflammation that is then happening. And I want you to also to think about here too, because I'll be specific. There are specific types of hormones, interleukins, cytokines. These are inflammatory markers for the body that can be upregulated. They can be increased with the GI tract when we have intestinal permeability and leaky gut and inflammation happening at the level of the GI tract. That then when that blood that's there at the level of the GI tract is also going everywhere else.
Yeah.
It's going to your muscles. It's going to your joints. It's going to your brain. It's going literally everywhere. So if we're taking a pain medication that is designed to help us reduce pain, that is probably because of an inflammatory issue that's happening in whichever joint or area in your body you're taking it for, Well, if we also have then an actual issue in the joint, like we should probably get that figured out. That I won't neglect that, right? But then on top of that, we also want to take a look at are there problems going on elsewhere in the body that are due to diet, that are due to the GI tract, that are due to some of these habits that we've had. You know, it can be a chicken and the egg at a certain point, like which one came first. But at some point, you've got to figure out how to manage that pain at the root level of really where it might be coming from. And we just don't want blood that is dealing with these inflammatory markers that can actually be fairly easily dealt with, you know, and I would say more or less than 3 to 6 months for most people. You can heal a lot of the GI tract in that amount of time, and see significant impacts throughout the body because of it. So hopefully I didn't get too far on a tangent there, but that's where I really see the impact of over-the-counter medications and things like that, is that they're covering up usually a deeper rooted problem that again has a lot to do with inflammation at that point.
It does. And before we get into hormones, when you were talking about, inflammation, and one of the signs of menopause, especially perimenopause, really menopause, is aching joints, pain and shoulder, elbow, wrist pain, finger pain, and it's a function of low estrogen. But most women will go and take, chronic amounts of painkillers, which is further deteriorating their bones, which are deteriorating because the estrogen is on the decline. So it's almost a vicious cycle. And then they get put on prescription calcium medications, which we'll talk about those. I'm on the fence about them. I don't understand them too well, but it isn't solving the problem. And I think this is really the issue we want to tackle today, is root cause. How do we not only stop this from happening in the first place, but if you are already in the throes of menopause and you have got all these aches and pains, where do we go? This episode is sponsored by Solal. Solal's BioCalmate contains the essential elements that help support our musculoskeletal and nervous system efficiently, including calcium, vitamin D, magnesium, and boron. You can purchase Solal products online by going to solal.co.za or wherever you buy quality health supplements.
Yeah, so there's some really interesting things that happen with estrogen when it starts to decrease. And as I mentioned, like we can start seeing the effects of perimenopause in like your mid 30s. It's like way earlier than most people think. And something that I think is really important to educate women on, because there are a lot of women who are out there who are wondering what's wrong with them. And everybody's saying that everything's normal, but actually a lot of the things that you just mentioned can be symptoms of menopause already starting, like the perimenopause state. So, all right. So with estrogen, so as we get into menopause, one of the things that then happens is estrogen in particular drops. Like that's it. We are no longer producing enough estrogen to stimulate our follicles to produce ovaries, or follicles in our ovaries to produce an egg. Apologies. We are no longer needing that process to happen. So, estrogen then drops. And when that then happens, it triggers a few different things to happen in the body. Number one, we start to see the reduction of things like growth hormone as well as IGF production. Estrogen will have an impact on that. It will also have an impact on our calcium regulation as well. So those are, and because of that, then that is what has this most significant impact. I will say one more thing too, but that is one thing that has the most significant impact on bone health. And then on top of that, it also impacts, the thing that I wanted to add to that is also that cortisol in and of itself will have an impact on that too. But protein is where we're going to see a really big mitigator of that estrogen drop. And estrogen also impacts our ability to absorb and utilize that protein as well. So when we're talking about, and there's actually been some very, very significant studies that have been done on like large, big amounts of people, like hundreds of thousands of women, where they've seen that just from protein alone and making sure that they're eating enough protein at anywhere between 60 to 100 grams of protein per day, they noticed that bone health, even though they were postmenopausal, like estrogen was on its way down,
Yeah.
they still saw improvements in health, bone density. So I want to highlight that because it can still be done, right? As far as like helping us to we just need to know some things that will help us to be able to build bone density. But that's what ends up happening really in the body is that as estrogen declines, then it starts to impact other areas of the body, which I mentioned. And then because of that, it will start to cause issues with our ability to maintain bone density. And exercise also is one area where we can help to prevent some of that bone loss in postmenopausal women as well. Protein,
Precisely.
exercise, things like that.
So it's when we are in a growth phase. So when our hormones are peaking and we're moving and we're exercising and we're picking up heavy things, we're signaling to our brain and to our bodies that we're in a growth phase, that things are moving forward, that repair has to happen, that growth has to happen. And then at some point in our lives, we decide we're not going to eat enough protein for whatever reason, whatever we saw on Instagram that told you shouldn't eat protein, which is the worst thing you can do. And that woman should not pick up heavy things because you'll get bulky, which is the next worst thing you can do. We're sending our bodies and our brains the message that we're declining or we're heading towards the end. And when our hormones start declining as well, then the brain really gets the message that, well, we've just got to give up and just let nature take its course. And nature really has no use for us once we're no longer fertile, like any animal. We do decline if we are content to let that happen. And again, many people think that that is just a function of aging, and I really don't think it should be or it has to be. So yeah, let's go. You mentioned earlier when you went and did some research, there are women in their 50s, 60s, 80s even who just by making a decision to eat better and to move more have completely reversed the signs of aging. And we're seeing this everywhere. And it's got nothing to do with Botox and fillers. This has really got to do with the decisions people make. So what did you find when you went looking for evidence that when we give our brains and our bodies the signal that we're still alive and thriving, what happens?
Well, we also have a previous episode on this as well, but your brain is really, really important as far as what you're telling it to do. So yeah, as I was looking for research, as I was also looking for evidence of people, I follow a couple of people on Instagram because I'm just so inspired by them and I just love what they've done. It's just like the best. But what I don't want to get sidetracked, but what I realized was that there are it can go either way. And you mentioned like if you believe that this is just a part of aging. Like, this is just how it goes. This is how your family's always done it. Like, you have always seen people in their 70s, 80s ending up in an old folks home and, they're just declining and that is just how it's always been. If you believe that, then yeah, that's exactly what will likely happen because your brain will play that out specifically. Like, it will follow the same track that you've always believed. If, however, you listen to things like this, if you also look around and you see people who are at the gym and they're in their 80s, in their 90s. My grandfather is 103.
Wow.
And he was walking a mile still, up, and I think he still does, but just even this year, he was still walking a mile around the neighborhood. Wow. Slowly, mind you, but still walking a mile. So I want to make sure that that's really, it's really important that we look for evidence of people who are doing things that are different, that are contrary contrary to the beliefs that maybe society would tell you to believe or how we've seen it up until this point. I also think too that as a society, we are seeing the impacts of the standard American diet, of Western, diets. We're seeing the impacts of sedentary lifestyles. We now have seen that play out enough that we know what ends up happening later down the road from that. But we also have seen what earlier generations, how they've aged. I'm talking about my grandfather also in particular, 103 years old, and nutrition, good, stayed active. Those kinds of things are really, really important. And you can see the impact of those things as they go. Anyway, I think that's one of the things that's just really important, is that if you are wanting to do something different than maybe what you have seen in the past, as far as your family history has gone, you can look around and find evidence of people who have done it. And yeah. And once you have that in your brain, then you can start telling it to do something different.
Oh, completely. It's what you expose yourself to. The possibilities are really impactful. I mean, my grandmother and my mother had osteoporosis, and they both had arthritis, but they both smoked and they both drank alcohol and they both abused painkillers for
Yep.
years. And my mum always said, well, she's got arthritis because her mother had arthritis, implying that I would get arthritis. And I said to her, even as a young child, I said, oh, I don't think so. I want to do this differently. And she was like, oh, what do you know?
Yeah.
And even then, I was like, I'm not prepared to just accept this. It doesn't make sense to me, because very
Yeah.
clearly what you're doing is resulting in what you're going through. So yeah, it's
That's
a
so
choice we
fascinating.
actually have. And I really, if we can get anything out of these discussions, is to let people understand that you've always got a choice, and
hmm
how well you've
I'm al
aged.
I'm always so curious about what it was that had you notice and feel that way, like, because for me, I think I've talked about this, but I had endometriosis, I had
Yeah.
migraines, I had all of these chronic issues, and a lot of people were like, oh, you can't heal those, like those, you're gonna have those for the rest of your life. And I was like,
Oh no.
no, I don't want to be in this pain every single month. I don't want to be dealing with these things for the rest of my life. Like, absolutely not. So that triggered a whole series of things to where I am today, 5 degrees later. But, I think I'm always so curious about
Yeah.
what it is that what triggers that change, that they're like, no, actually, I'm not
Yeah.
gonna just follow that path.
It is a really good question, because I mean, there's people who will just accept what
Hmm.
they've been told, and there's people who will just not accept what they've been told. And I don't know what defines that. But if you
Yeah.
tell me I can't have something or I can't do
No,
something, I'm going to go to the ends of the earth to prove you wrong. So, I mean, that's
that's how
all
I
I
am.
need here is, you're going to have
That's
arthritis. I'm
interesting.
like, I'm not. There's no way that's going to happen. So it's just, I think it's a personality trait.
It must
I don't know
be.
where it comes from, because my parents were not like that. I don't know
Yeah.
where it came from. Yeah.
Interesting. I'm going to look into that a little bit more because I do find that really fascinating. But I am actually the same way. If somebody tells me no, like
That's all
I'm
you need.
not,
Yeah.
I don't accept no very well.
Exactly. Exactly. I just think there have to be people like that to challenge everything out there within the context of making sense. If it's not going to
Yeah,
harm
of
anyone
course.
else, what difference does it make? Um, anyway, so
Okay, sorry, I
let's
sidetracked us a little bit.
it's a great sidetrack. I think it's again, it's really important to challenge what we've been learned and challenge the status quo. And this is how things change. This is how people get well. This is how innovation happens, when people don't accept what they've been told, that they go in
Hmm.
search of something different. And it's
Yeah.
really, it's out there. If I hadn't seen it a million times in my practice, I'm sure you've seen thousands of people change their lives. You wouldn't believe it. So we know it's possible, and it's really important to keep that message strong.
Yeah, I
So
agree.
let's jump into exercise, because I
Yeah.
think this is what we're both passionate about, and how
Mhm.
weight-bearing exercise, compound movements, even things like jumping rope and jumping on a trampoline is so healthy for your bones. And these are things we don't think about. So, well, most people don't think about. So let's really go deep
Yeah.
into how this all works.
Okay. Well, so yes, you're right. I'm very passionate about this because it's really, really important. So one of the things that is I want to start off with is something called Wolff's Law. So W like a wolf. Wolff's Law basically states that when you're exercising your muscles and you are causing them to have a very strong contraction, it's going to pull on those tendons that are then attached to your bones. And because of that very strong contraction and that pulling on the bone, it sends a signal to your body that, hey, we need to adapt to this particular stressor that is here. And what it then does is it triggers a series of responses that then it releases hormones like growth hormone. It releases hormones like uh, insulin like growth factor 1, IGF-1, and testosterone. Those hormones will, and this, by the way, this happens your whole entire life. So
Yeah.
this doesn't, it is very, very strong and heavy in your younger years. But even when you are postmenopausal in your 80s and your 90s, if you are doing any kind of exercise that is going to have a significant amount of tension on and contraction of those muscles, it will stimulate hormones like growth hormone. It will stimulate IGF-1 and testosterone. It will stimulate those things to then tell your body to start stimulating bone production. Osteoblasts, osteocytes, things like that, because of that contraction. Also, because of exercise, it will also influence hormone regulation as well, including estrogen, as well as parathyroid hormone, as well as cortisol, which also have parathyroid hormone is very sensitive. Like your parathyroid is like, its main job is to make sure that calcium in your blood is at a certain level. It is like the main job of the parathyroid. And I'm telling you this, it is so sensitive to calcium. It's the coolest thing, but like a drop, a rise, it will do everything it can to bring it back to normal. So, and to a balanced state. So this is what exercise really does, is it really starts to impact, whether or not your brain is telling your body to build bone density. So that's why exercise is so important. But the thing is, and I will also say weight bearing exercise. So yes, that does include walking. Yeah, walking is a weight bearing exercise. And this is when I said, before, like lighter, smaller women can be a little more prone to, bone density issues, Asian populations being one of them that really stands out in the literature, right? Research, because they tend to be smaller. The reason why is because you don't have as much weight on those bones. Right. So in those cases, you've got to make sure that you are doing things that are going to be influencing weight bearing. So I think about things like if you were to just add like a backpack with like some weight on it when you go for a walk, that would also increase that. You will see, not to say that everybody has to go out and join CrossFit, but like you'll see the the weight vests, and you'll see things like them carrying heavier sandbags, or you'll see people carrying kettlebells. I'm doing this on video. I know that many of you are listening, but dumbbells, kettlebells, things that are very easy for you to get in your house somehow, and walking the driveway back and forth with like something on your shoulders, right? That's going to increase the amount of weight that is on your body. By the way, this is also a really great way to strengthen your abdominal muscles as well, not just like crunches, which are not super great for your low back, but like legitimately getting weight onto your shoulders, onto your body, and you are carrying that weight. That is what then produces that weight bearing on your bones, which again then will stimulate those same things to be like, oh, we need to build more bone because we need to be able to carry this weight. So it's those adaptations to the stressors that you put on your body through exercise, through doing heavy weights. I did mention, yes, bone, like kettlebells and things like that. Yes, great dumbbells, easy things, but also like easy things to do, right? To grab, to get. But I'm also talking here about if I know that barbells can be really scary for a lot of people, but finding maybe somebody who can be a safe and good trainer for you to learn how to do it safely. Though it's more than just walking. It's more than just using lighter weights. We really want that like heavy stress on the system. The weight that you can do like 1 to 3 reps and be like, holy smokes, I can't go. You're going to failure. I know how that sounds, and I know that I've been in a world where that is normal. And so I know for a lot of people that can actually sound very like there's a lot of fear, I think, of injury and things that can come along with that. But you build up to it, right? You build up to these things. But this is, I just stress it so much because number one, that's what's going to actually build muscle mass. And we also know, we won't get into it, but muscle mass also has an impact on your immune system. There are so many things that happen when you have enough muscle mass that actually influence many other areas of your body that don't often get talked about. Anyway, I can't stress it enough, but like that really heavy stress on your muscles is what then leads to your bone building bone.
Exactly. And, it makes me think of the blue zones. And what really comes out of the blue zones for me is not going to anything to do with their diets. It's the fact that these octogenarians are active and they're digging in the soil and they're carrying heavy things and they're moving. They're not sedentary. They're actually doing weight-bearing exercise for most of their days. And this is why they're healthy. It's got very little to do with what they're eating real food because they don't have access to processed food. They have no choice. So, I mean, it plays a part. But what really stood out for me in that Blue Zones series on Netflix was the fact that they were doing manual labor. And when you look at any population group that does manual labor into their later years, that you're going to find a healthier population group, irrespective of access to medication, irrespective of what else is going on in their lives. Because let's also talk, but we'll get, it's so easy to get sidetracked. I know the impact of exercise on our stress levels. I mean, I can't go a day without training because it just calms my monkey mind. And it's for me the only thing that works when it comes to anxiety and stress. So I might train too much, but I do it mostly for my head. And you were mentioning high cortisol levels and stress having an impact on inflammation. And I don't train, I'm in pain. I train for those 2 reasons because it calms down that sort of inflammatory pathway that's obviously active when you're really, really stressed. Let's just dip into the role of exercise from a stress management and anxiety management point of view.
Yeah, for sure. Well, one of the things too that's really common with drop in estrogen or with estrogen imbalances is mood swings, right? So we also will often see increased irritability, we'll see anxiety, we'll see a lot more sadness. So depression can come up, whether it's severe or just something that is kind of like on the surface kind of all the time, living in the background. We also see things like brain fog. We see things like fatigue, and it can also influence sleep. So all of these things are signs of cortisol.
Right.
They're also sign of imbalances with sleep. And we know, because we've seen it in so many different studies, that exercise is one of the main things that can help influence all of those things. I will also say on the brain fog side that balancing your blood sugar makes the biggest impact and making sure that you're eating enough throughout the day, because I know that women tend to skip meals. So eating enough food throughout the day will have a significant impact on brain fog. Anyway, so exercise on cortisol. I just want to make sure I got that in there because it is really, really important. But with exercise and cortisol, it does, a lot of people find exercise to be that one thing that as long as they have enough movement in their routine, it manages a lot of the thing, anything that's going on in their brain, the anxiety, that kind of. And I think that's actually that's a kind of a normal thing. One of the things I think about a lot is that if you consider, but I will give you another thing on top of that though. But if you consider like if we're experiencing something that's stressful enough for our system that it's causing anxiety or it's causing some of those things. It's increasing cortisol in your body. Well, as far as how we've evolved and how humans are, if there's something that is potentially stressful for the system, it's telling you your system's trying to survive from it. Your nervous system is in fight or flight. What are the things that we usually do in fight or flight? Well, if there's a lion that's in front of us, what are we going to do? We're either going to fight it, which is going to take some level of exercise, or we're going to run from it, which is also going to take some level of exercise, right? So these are some really common things that I think people find exercise to be really helpful for them, because it helps them to release that survival mechanism, and then their body is then able to get into the parasympathetic nervous system afterwards. Hopefully, if your system doesn't, it can stay in fight or flight for forever until you do something to get it out of it. But most of the time, your system's then going to go into parasympathetic, and then that's when you're going to feel better. You're not going to have that monkey brain. You're not going to have those gremlins circling around, that anxiety, that feeling of like, I got to move. That feeling gets kind of tackled. And I think it's not a bad thing. I think that's actually one thing that's really helpful. But I will add this anecdote, though, because I have had many people who have had autoimmune diseases and have had just their bodies are so exhausted. Yeah. They are so tired. And their adrenals, we didn't really even talk about adrenals and how that has an impact on hormones and on estrogen and on all of that. But their adrenals are exhausted, and then they're one of their coping mechanisms is exercise. Yeah. And it's really then hard when I'm like, okay, but we gotta get your body some rest here. We really gotta do something gentle. And for those individuals, oftentimes walking or even yoga or any sort of movement is good enough. But sometimes there's people where their coping mechanism is actually exercise. And so when we pull that away, because we've just got to get enough rest in the system, they then have to find something else. And so this is just why I bring this up, is because if that coping mechanism is taken away, oftentimes people will go and find something else. They'll find something like alcohol. They'll find something else, food, to fill that void, unless we get to the root of where it's coming from. Yeah. So that anxiety, those things that are causing your brain to circle around and not settle down, and they are triggering your immune system into a fight or flight response, it can be really beneficial to identify and be able to shift through those things to change why the body or the brain is triggering that specific response. Because if we have to then find a different way if we have to remove exercise in any kind of way, or we have to remove anything in any kind of way, alcohol, smoking, lots of the things that we talked about here, if we have to remove certain types of foods that have been our comfort mechanisms, we're going to want to find another way to cope. And there are definitely different ways to cope with things. One of them being getting to the actual root of where it's coming from in the first place. Nervous system regulation. I'm just talking about it so much right now because we talk about exercise, we talk about sleep, we talk about reducing inflammation, we talk about eating good, healthy foods, whole foods. Your cookbook is amazing for helping people with that. You and your podcast is just exploring all of these different areas of how can we really have vitality and thrive as we age through life. But also your nervous system and how it's responding to what's going on, what you learned in your past that's helping you survive now. We got to look at that because if your brain and your body can't get into a resting, healing, digestion state because it's stuck in that fight or flight, cortisol will just run rampant and it will do what it will do. And that's why we see autoimmune diseases. That's why we see all of these chronic illnesses, bone density issues, all the things we've talked about here today can all be tracked also down to that nervous system regulation as well. So
yeah. And osteoporosis being the end product of stuff that we just haven't looked at, like everything else. It's just the end product of the work we haven't done, because as
Yeah.
human beings, we're really good at ignoring the signs until we are
So
really up
good.
against the wall. I mean, no one goes and takes action when they get a niggle. I'm guilty of that,
Yeah.
and I work in this industry. We all are. We are like, tomorrow I'll wake up and it'll be fine. It never is. You've got to take action. And,
It's true.
what I really want to get into as we're coming up to the hour is, what are the actionables that somebody can take? There's obviously the testing, the blood testing for the hormones, and there are the DEXA scans, so you can establish whether or not you have any kind of bone loss. But that's all good and well. What are the actionable steps that people can realistically take in their day-to-day lives to arrest, slow down, and reverse? And I'm saying reverse quite seriously, aging and bone aging specifically.
Mhm.
How do we pull up the handbrake and as early as possible?
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna try and like break this down. If you can do like some very simple things, you'll hit a lot of
Yeah.
different areas. So one, let's make sure that our nutrients are in order. So diet and food. So nutrition is going to have a really big impact. I mentioned your cookbook, but like these things matter. Like the foods that you put in your body matter because if you make sure that you're eating enough protein,
Yeah.
if you make sure that you're eating enough foods that are going to give you, I call it eating the rainbow, right? But like eating lots of different types of vegetables and fruits and making sure that you're also getting starches are also good. We don't want to just completely eliminate those either, right? Your colorful foods, sweet potatoes, beets, right? Like these really colorful foods are really vital for our bodies to getting the nutrients that we need. Is there a role for supplementation? Absolutely. I do think still that things that have been said that our foods aren't as nutrient dense as they used to be. Yes, I believe that is true. So supplementation will have its form, but let's not use supplementation as the only thing because if we're supplementing over a poor diet, it's just,
Pointless.
and I will bring up that like we've also seen that there are some forms of supplementation that can lead to things we don't want. Like calcium supplementation in some studies has suggested that it might increase the risk of cardiovascular issues, heart disease, heart problems, right? From supplementation. But when they looked at that the same population and they got the most of their calcium from food, no problems, right? So it's in an age where so many people will have all these different supplement companies and the wellness industry is a billion dollar industry. We got to be looking at the basics, the basic foundations. And our planet Earth has given you pretty much everything that you need. So, where can we maybe start supporting some of our local farmers, going to our local markets, right? To get foods that are going to be raised, hopefully organically, hopefully foods that, are raised well. Can we make sure that we're getting the best high quality protein that we can? Even if it's not great protein, getting protein is going to be important. And I'm calling from animal foods. If we can do what we can to get it from there, that it really, it has a very significant impact on our health over the long term. And I did mention some numbers. Anywhere between 65 to 100 grams of protein per day is going to be a good spot. I would suggest for some populations a little bit higher than that. And that's just going to depend. But those are some things I know that sometimes people will say that protein and acidic blood and things like that can be an issue. Yes, but also I just really think that the higher amounts of protein that you can get tend to be the better. So,
if you're balancing that with your fruits and vegetables,
yep,
everything
it doesn't. It's really a negligent problem. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, but I will say, because I know that some people are trending towards the like only meat diets. And I really think that balance here is so important. You need the two, you need both and plus the fiber and those different types of fibers that go into your GI tract that influence your bacteria, right? All of these things, it really matters. Eat the rainbow, get good amounts of protein. That's going to hit most of the areas of, what you need. Getting also fish, salmon, sardines, omega-3s. A can of sardines has like 1,000 milligram. Nope, sorry. Yeah, it has 1,000, depending on the can of sardines. It can have basically the amount that you need in a day for omega-3s. You don't even have to supplement. Now, the next thing I will say is that the sun is so important. I live in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. It rains here all of the time. I've decided that I pretty much need to get somewhere sunny at least 2 times in the winter. I have to get somewhere sunny. But vitamin D is really important. We didn't even talk about it, but it influences calcium. It influences, we didn't even talk about vitamin C either. Okay, well, there's a lot of things, guys, but if you eat a really good diet, it's going to make a really big impact. But vitamin D also from the sun is so, so, so important. And I think that one of the things that we don't do enough is just laying out in the sun. Lay out in the sun. Go enjoy the sunlight. It's really, obviously to a certain point, don't get sunburned, be careful of your skin, but get some vitamin D, get some sunlight. If you do live in a place like I do, supplement with vitamin D. It's going to be a pretty important thing for you and for your bone health, also for your mental health. And then hydration, make sure you're staying hydrated. A lot of the things that we've talked about here, gut health, hydration, food, they're all going to influence inflammation. And weight train, build muscle, make that a top priority, because again, if you are focused on building muscle, guess what? You're going to need to make sure you're eating enough protein. Guess what? You're going to need to make sure that you're recovering well, right? You're going to need to make sure you're staying hydrated. So if we just focus on some of these basic foundational pieces, also getting more exercise, as we mentioned, can help reduce cortisol, it can help reduce stress. So would I also suggest getting to the root of some of the triggers and the things that are potentially creating the problems? Absolutely. I think that it's been one of the it's changed my life entirely. But also, would exercise help? Yes. Would just going out and laying out in the sun help? Absolutely. Read a book. Go for a walk. All these things are going to have a big, big impact, right? That's what I would say is, it's really focus on your basics, get your foundation right. And once you're there, then you can start chipping away at what I would say are some of the other things. Is sauna potentially helpful? For sure. Is cold plunging potentially helpful for some populations? For sure. We know this. We have some things that are evidence of that. But those are what I would say are the cream, the cherry on top of the foundational pieces that we really need to focus on, which is what I mentioned already.
Yeah, I just want to add in there sleep, because we build muscle when
sleep. I'm so sorry. Yes, of course, sleep. Go ahead. But yes, sleep is so important.
So I was waiting for you to say sleep, but because we build muscle when we're sleeping, and we regulate our adrenals when we're sleeping, and everything happens when we're sleeping, and people don't get enough sleep. You really need hours. And that there's that old saying that the older you get, the less sleep you need. That's absolute nonsense. If you're going to fall for that, then you're going to age badly. It's nonsense. I think that's just a lifetime of accumulated bad habits, and it's a story we tell ourselves. You don't need less sleep. We all need lots of sleep if you're going to stay young and vibrant and healthy and energetic and look good and age well. That's something really important.
Yeah, I will. Yes. And sleep. One of the things I also see a lot is that people wake up multiple times throughout the night. And most of the time that's because cortisol is imbalanced. Because your cortisol is up, it's waking you up, which means it's counteracting melatonin, which is there to keep you asleep. So if that is happening, we got to start looking at some deeper layers and deeper factors. If you're struggling with falling asleep, if you're struggling with staying asleep, if you're not waking up rested, those are all signs, like you said, niggles that we don't necessarily do anything about until it's a really big problem. There are some things we've talked about here, just not sleeping well, that are precursor signs that a larger issue is potentially on its way. So let's take a look at it now and start figuring out why, because some of these things can be changed fairly easily. As we're also exposed to more screens and we're not going outside as much, and all of those things, they all have an impact, but can easily be changed with just some, minor changes to your life. Sometimes they're drastic, but a lot of the times over time, there's small changes over time that have the biggest impact.
Yeah. And don't ignore the niggles. If something is bugging and it doesn't go away within 2 or 3 days, take action. This is how most things are solved in life, is when you take early action and face these things.
Yeah.
You need.
And don't let a doctor tell you it's normal.
Oh, no.
Don't let a doctor tell you it's normal. Like, I can't even.
No.
Find someone that will be like, no, you're right. It's not normal. And here's what we do about it.
Yeah. Who's willing to dig deeper with you and go on the journey. That's really, really important. Love that. Dr. Kirstin, thank you so much. I love our conversations. They are always so much fun, and I love the deviations, because I think this is what podcasts are about. It's like, no good conversation goes down a straight road, and anything to do with the body and health is all over the place, because everything's connected, and we're complex people, complex organisms. So nothing is one answer, nothing is straightforward. So it's always a great conversation. So where can listeners learn more about your work and connect with you?
Yeah. You know what? Come find me over on Instagram if you're on that platform at Dr. Kirstin. I do talk a lot right now about motherhood and mom stuff and all of that, because I do actually believe that like it's all tied together, as you mentioned. But I still talk a lot about health things. I think that's the best place to find me. You can also find my clinic website at NW Northwest, so nwfunctionalmedicine.com. And yeah, I'd say that's probably a good places to find me.
I'll put you all over the show notes as usual. And thank you so much for your time today, and have a happy, successful, wonderful new year with your wonderful family.
Thank you, and you too.
Thank you so much.